They called her cursed. They sold her to a monster. But when the Lycan King saw her, he remembered. Chapter 1. The Curse. The word curse was not a shout, it was a whisper. A sideways glance, a stone dropped in a well of silence. For Amaris, it was the air she breathed. She was born under a fractured moon, the night her mother's lifeblood painted the birthing furs red. From that first tragic breath, the title was sealed upon her, cursed. Her pack, the Stone River Pack, was a place of harsh granite and harsher laws. Everything that went wrong found its roots in her. A dry season? Amaris's presence soured the sky. A failed hunt? The deer sensed the rot on her soul and fled. The sickness that took 2 elders last winter? Amaris had looked at them, and her shadow had been enough. She was 19 now, and the curse had settled into her bones, a cold companion. She moved through the pack grounds like a ghost, her shoulders perpetually hunched. Her silver-white hair, a color no one else shared, kept braided and bound. She was an Omega, the lowest rank, but she was less than that. She was an omen. Her wolf, the spirit that should have been her other half, was silent. Amaris couldn't feel her, couldn't hear her, couldn't draw on her strength. There was only a hollow space where a soulmate should be. This, the pack shaman had declared, was the proof. Zaria, the name she had secretly whispered to the silent space, was either dead or had never been. She is an empty vessel. Her father Roderick had pronounced, his face a mask of grief turned to granite. He was the Alpha, and his word was law. Today the curse was particularly heavy. A rogue, maddened with sickness, had been caught at their border. He had torn through 3 warriors before being brought down. As the bodies were prepared for the pyre, Amaris felt the weight of their judgment. She had been at the stream, washing the pack's linens, when the attack happened. She was close. She heard a sub-alpha, Corvus, mutter to another. Her aura must have drawn him in. Death follows her. Amaris kept her eyes down, her hands raw from the lye soap. She finished her tasks, her movements small and economical, designed to draw no attention. But attention always found her. As the twin suns of the wolf world began to dip, casting long, mournful shadows, her father approached. Roderick was a large man, but his power seemed diminished, worn thin by the burden of her existence. He didn't look at her. He never did. "Your presence here has cost us too much," he said. The words weren't angry. They were flat, sterile, the sound of a ledger being closed. Amaris said nothing. Her silence was her only shield. What was there to say? She could not deny her mother was dead. She could not deny the hunters returned empty-handed. She could not deny the sickness. She could only be the cause. "An accord has been reached," he continued, his gaze fixed on the pyre smoke staining the twilight. "Alpha Varric of the Darkwater Ridge has an interest in you." A genuine icy thread of terror perforated her resigned state. Varric. Even here, miles away, the stories of Alpha Varric were used to frighten pups. He was a brute, a collector of broken things, a wolf who ruled not through respect but through mutilation. "He has paid our debts," Roderick said. "The blood debt the rogues incurred today, he has covered it." Paid, debts, covered. The words were clinical. She was a line item, a commodity. "You will be ready at moonrise," he said. He turned to leave, his duty done. "Father," she whispered. The word was rough, unused, a betrayal of her silence. Roderick paused, his back to her. "Why?" The question was a puff of air, a child's plea in the body of a pariah. He finally looked at her. His eyes were not a father's. They were an alpha's, cold and final. "Because the pack must survive, and you were never truly one of us." He left her there, alone, as the first chill of night settled onto her skin like a shroud. The curse had not just followed her. It had finally, irrevocably, consumed her life. She was to be sold, and there was no one, not even the silent wolf within, to cry for her. Chapter 2. Sold for silver. Moonrise came not as a beacon, but as a judgment. The moon itself was a sliver, a sickly or pale claw in the sky. Amaris stood by the pack line, a small bundle of her few possessions at her feet, a spare tunic, a whetstone she'd found, and a small, smooth river stone she'd kept since childhood. It was all she had. Her father, Roderick, stood with his senior wolves. They were a grim line of defense, but not for her. They were here to ensure the transaction was smooth. Then they came. Alpha Varric did not arrive with a large entourage. He brought only 2, but their presence was enough to stifle the breath. They moved from the shadows of the forest, their forms coalescing as if summoned from the darkness itself. Varric was not the hulking brute Amaris had imagined. He was worse. He was lean, elegant, with hair as black as a raven's wing, and eyes that held a disturbing reptilian stillness. He wore cured black leathers, not rough hides, and the silver clasps on his uniform gleamed in the meager light. He was a predator who enjoyed the aesthetics of the kill. He stopped a dozen paces from Roderick, his gaze sweeping over the Stone River Alpha with casual contempt. Then his eyes found Amaris. They did not just look, they appraised. They catalogued her thin frame, the bowed head, the pale, bound hair. A slow smile, thin and sharp, stretched his lips. It did not reach his eyes. Alpha Roderick, Varric's voice was smooth, a layer of velvet over jagged steel. You present a meager offering. Roderick's jaw tightened. She is as described. The bargain stands. The bargain, Varric mused. He stepped forward, ignoring Roderick, and circled Amaris. She remained perfectly still, a rabbit before the snake. She could smell him, a sharp metallic scent, like cold iron and ozone. He stopped behind her, and she flinched as he lifted a single heavy lock of her silver hair. The cursed Omega, he said, the words a low purr against her ear. They say you drain the life from the land, that you silenced your own wolf. He let the hair drop. I do enjoy a challenge. He moved back to face Roderick, his smile vanishing. The silver. One of his guards, a scarred male named Kale, stepped forward and threw a heavy leather pouch at Roderick's feet. It landed with a dull, heavy thud. The sound of her worth. The sound of her life being signed away. Roderick did not stoop to pick it up. He merely nodded. The debt is paid. She is yours. She is yours. The words settled over Amaris, a final crushing weight. Her entire life had been a prelude to this single moment of absolute desolation. She had been rejected, and now she was sold. Varric gestured lazily to her. Come, pet. She did not move. Not in defiance. She had none left. But in paralysis. Her feet were rooted to the ground that had rejected her. A low growl rumbled in Varric's chest. Did you not hear me? She is quiet, Roderick offered, a pathetic excuse. Varric laughed, a short barking sound. He closed the distance in 2 quick strides. Amaris cringed, expecting a blow. Instead, his hand clamped onto her upper arm. His grip was a manacle of bone and sinew, his fingers digging into her skin, bruising her instantly. It was not a strike. It was an act of ownership. She will learn to answer, he stated, his eyes fixed on Roderick. He began to pull her toward the forest, toward the dark water territory. Amaris stumbled, her small bundle forgotten. She looked back one last time. Her father, her Alpha, was already bending down, his hand closing over the pouch of silver. He did not watch her go. She was truly, utterly alone. As Varric dragged her into the enveloping darkness of the trees, a single, cold realization formed. This was not a rescue. This was an execution, just of a different, slower kind. Chapter 3. The Blood Moon Auction. The boundary between Stone River and Darkwater territory was a dead, gray wasteland. It was a place of neutral ground, avoided by all healthy animals, where treaties were broken and illicit trades were made. Varric had not taken her to his pack. He had taken her here, to a place known as the Barrens. The moon, a pale sliver 2 nights ago, was now swelling, stained a deep, unsettling crimson. The blood moon was rising, an event that happened only once every few decades, stirring ancient magics and unsettling the wolf's blood. A fitting light for the occasion, Varric mused, his grip still a steel band on her arm. He had brought her to a gathering. Several other minor alphas were present, their demeanor a mix of avarice and fear. It wasn't a pack meeting, it was a market. And Amaris was not the only property being displayed. Other omegas, captured rogues, and rare herbs were being traded. This was an auction of the unwanted and the illegal. Amaris was kept to the side, bound by a thin leather rope to a withered tree, a mark of her new status as pet. Varric was bartering with a grim-faced alpha over a cache of silver-tipped arrows, his attention thankfully off her. She pulled her thin tunic tighter, the coppery light of the blood moon making the world look like a fresh wound. The air was thick, vibrating with a tension that went beyond the black market deals. The moon was angry. Suddenly, the bartering stopped. The rustle of wind in the dead trees ceased. Every wolf in the clearing, Alpha, Beta, and Omega, froze, their heads snapping toward the northern ridge. What is it? Varric hissed. his hand flying to the hilt of his blade. "Royal Guard," his man, Kale, whispered, his face pale. "I smell the king's scent." Panic rippled through the clearing. This was unsanctioned. The king's law was absolute, and an illegal auction under the sacred blood moon was a death sentence. 3 figures appeared on the ridge. They were not a war party, but they didn't need to be. They wore the black and gold of the Lycan King, Lucius. Their leader, a tall, severe wolf with a face like carved oak, stepped into the crimson light. Amaris recognized the crest. This was Theron, the king's hand. "By order of the Lycan King, Lucius," Theron's voice boomed, carrying across the clearing without a single shift. "All territories are on high alert. The blood moon stirs that which was buried. All alphas are to return to their territories and report any anomalies." His eyes swept the illegal gathering, a look of profound disgust on his face. "This circus is disbanded. Your alphas will answer for this insult to the king." Alphas began to scatter, grabbing their goods. Varric was furious, his carefully constructed market dissolving. He grabbed Amaris's rope, yanking her hard. "We're leaving." But as he pulled her, the wind shifted. It was a strange, sudden gust, sweeping from the south, cutting against the wind from the north where the king's men stood. It smelled of the deep forest, of crushed moonlight and ancient stone. And it carried Amaris's scent, her unique, cursed scent, overlaid with her terror, directly toward the king's hand. Theron paused. He sniffed the air, a look of confusion on his face. "What is that?" Miles away, in the ancient, stone-cold halls of the Lycania citadel, King Lucius stood on a balcony, his eyes fixed on the bleeding moon. He had not slept in 3 centuries. He had ruled for 2 millennia, a king of dust and memory. His fated mate lost to a war so old it was no longer even a myth. He was immortal, and his grief was just as timeless. But as the blood moon reached its apex, a single impossible scent thread, moonlight and crushed herbs and a sorrow so deep it mirrored his own, found him. It was a ghost, a whisper, a dream. Lucius, the king of all Lycans, gripped the stone railing. His golden eyes, dormant for centuries, blazed to life. The memories of her, of their life before, of her death, flooded him. Back in the Barrens, Theron felt the shock of his king's sudden, violent emotion through their alpha-beta bond. It was a roar of agony, disbelief, and a single desperate word. Her. Theron's head snapped back to the fleeing crowd, his eyes searching wildly. "That scent," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Impossible." Varric dragged Amaris into the shadows, oblivious, but as they vanished, a single strand of her silver-white hair, loosened from her braid, was caught by the wind. It drifted through the clearing, landing at Theron's feet. He stared at it, the red moon painting the world in blood. Far away, a king roared. A whisper on the wind, a prophecy reborn. The Lycan King remembered her. Chapter 4, his pet. The Darkwater Ridge was a fortress of jagged black stone and damp, clinging moss. The air was colder here, the trees skeletal, their branches like grasping claws. Unlike the communal if cruel layout of Stone River, Varric's pack was a place of rigid, brutalist order. The alphas and betas lived in the main keep, while the omegas were housed in a row of damp, low-roofed stone huts that more closely resembled kennels. Amaris was shoved into one. There were 4 other omegas inside, huddled on thin straw pallets. They were all gaunt, their eyes hollow, carrying the fading bruises of past punishments. They looked at Amaris with a mixture of pity and resentment. A new target meant a temporary reprieve for them. "Alpha Varric wants this one special." Kale the guard sneered to the others, giving Amaris a final shove that sent her sprawling onto the dirt floor. "Don't let her rest." Her life became a new, refined circle of hell. At Stone River, she had been a pariah, an object of superstitious fear. Here at Darkwater, she was a thing. She was his pet. Varric seemed to take a perverse pleasure in her silence. He assigned her the most degrading tasks. She mucked out the kennels of the werewolves, her hands cracked and bleeding. She served the alphas at their nightly feasts, forced to stand in the corner of the great hall, trembling as they drank and roared and threw scraps of food her way. She was never to speak, never to look anyone in the eye. But worse than the labor was Varric's fear. It was not the fear of an equal. It was the superstitious dread a man feels for a spider he intends to crush. He was fascinated by her curse. He would summon her to his private chambers late at night. She would stand on the cold stone floor barefoot, while he sat by his fire, sharpening his blades. He wouldn't touch her. He would just watch. Is it true? He'd ask the silence. Did you kill your mother by being born? Amaris would stand, her gaze fixed on a crack in the floor, her body vibrating with a quiet, ceaseless terror. They say you have no wolf, he'd muse, testing the edge of a dagger with his thumb. What a waste. Such a perfect, pale vessel and nothing inside. He wanted to see her break. He wanted a reaction. A scream, a sob, a plea. Her silence, the only defense she'd ever known, seemed to infuriate him more than any defiance could. He saw it as a challenge. One evening, after she'd accidentally spilled a drop of water on his boot, he'd backhanded her. The crack of the blow silenced the entire hall. She fell, her lips splitting, the taste of her own blood flooding her mouth. She lay on the stone, the world spinning, but she made no sound. She simply pushed herself back up, resumed her position against the wall, and stared at the floor. Varric's eyes had narrowed. He saw the curse as a power, a dark, defiant one, and he was determined to wring it out of her, to possess it or destroy it. The other Omegas, seeing that her status as pet only brought her more direct, sinister attention from the Alpha, began to torment her in the small ways the powerless can. They stole her meager food rations. They forgot to wake her for duties, earning her a lashing from Kale. She was an outcast among the outcasts. She was being unmade, piece by piece. The girl from Stone River was dissolving, leaving only a hollow shell dedicated to enduring the next moment and the next. The hollow space where Zaria, her wolf, should be, felt larger than ever, a black, cold vacuum. That night, shivering on her damp pallet, Varric's words echoed in her head. An empty vessel. He was right. She was empty. She was nothing. Chapter 5. The Dream. Exhaustion was her only mercy. When Amaris finally succumbed to sleep, it was a heavy, dreamless void. But on the fourth night at Darkwater, something changed. The cold, damp kennel dissolved. The smell of unwashed bodies and fear was replaced by something new. Something ancient. She was standing in a forest, but not a forest she knew. The trees were monumental, their bark like silver, their leaves whispering in a language she almost understood. The ground was soft, a carpet of moss that seemed to glow with its own inner light. And the moon? It was not the fractured, judgmental moon of her life. It was a brilliant, impossible orb, full and luminous, and it bathed the entire world in liquid silver. She was not wearing her Omega's rags. She wore a simple white dress that felt like woven moonlight against her skin. Her hair was unbound, a silver white cascade down her back. She was not afraid. A sound, like the low resonance of a cello, vibrated through the air. It was a voice. A man's voice. I have missed you. She turned. He was standing by a waterfall that flowed with the same silver light as the moon. He was tall, his form wreathed in shadows, his power a palpable physical presence. She could not see his face, only the outline of broad shoulders and the intense, burning gold of his eyes, stars in the darkness of his silhouette. He was not a stranger. The hollow place inside her chest ached with recognition. It was a feeling so profound, so overwhelming, it stole her breath. This was the one she'd been waiting for, the one her silent wolf had been crying for. They tried to hide you from me. The voice continued, a rumble of ancient sorrow and a promise of unyielding fury. They sealed you in flesh, buried your soul. He took a step toward her. She did not retreat. I have waited. I have searched every shadow, every star, every new soul, for a trace of you. He was close now. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the sheer primal power of an Alpha King. He was everything. He lifted a hand, his large calloused fingers tracing the air near her cheek, afraid to touch, as if she were an illusion that might shatter. My Amaris. The name. Her name. No one had said her name with such reverence. Not cursed, not pet, not Omega, but Amaris. It was a prayer, a statement of fact, a name that anchored the world. She woke with a gasp, her body drenched in a cold sweat. The gray, miserable light of dawn was filtering into the hut. The other Omegas were stirring. The dream was gone, but the feeling remained, a warm, resonant ache in her chest. A single tear, the first she had shed since her mother's death, traced a path through the grime on her cheek. She touched it, bewildered. The dream had felt more real than her entire waking life. She whispered the name back to the silence, a secret treasure. My Amaris. Chapter 6. The Summoning. The weeks that followed the dream were a study in cruelty. The fleeting warmth of the memory made the cold reality of Darkwater Ridge even more unbearable. Varric's obsession with her curse grew, and her silence only stoked his rage. He had taken to new torments, small cuts and burns, testing her threshold for pain. Amaris bore it all, her mind retreating to the silver forest, to the golden eyes she couldn't quite remember but could never forget. One frozen afternoon, a royal messenger arrived at the gates. He was not Theron, but he wore the same Lycan King's crest. He was a formal, austere wolf named Soren, and he carried a rolled decree bound with a gold cord and sealed with the king's wax. Amaris was serving in the main hall, her hands trembling as she ladled thin soup into bowls for the guards. She kept her head down, but she watched from beneath her lashes. Soren refused to sit, refused the offer of mead, and read the decree in a voice that cut through the smoky hall. By decree of His Royal Majesty, King Lucius, reigning Alpha of all Lycan territories, the annual Summit of Alphas, traditionally held in the spring, is hereby moved. It will commence in 3 days' time, on the new moon. A murmur of protest rose from Varric's assembled betas. 3 days was not enough time to prepare. Soren held up a hand, silencing them. His Majesty's word is law. All Alphas will present themselves at the Lycania Citadel. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, landing on Amaris for a split second, a look of something in his eyes before he continued. Furthermore, by the king's explicit command, a new addendum is added. To assess the health and stability of the packs after the Blood Moon's passage, every Alpha must be accompanied by their full retinue, including all Omegas in their care. The hall went dead quiet. Varric, who had been lounging on his carved wooden throne, slowly sat up. His eyes narrowed. All Omegas? That is the king's command, Soren said, his face impassive. He wishes to ensure all members of all packs are accounted for and protected. Protected? Varric sneered. The king has not cared for the health of Omegas in 1,000 years. Why now? The king's motives are his own, Soren said, his tone a clear warning. You will be there, with your entire pack. Failure to appear will be taken as an act of secession and treason. Soren rolled the scroll, bowed curtly, a gesture of protocol, not respect, and left the hall. For a long minute, the only sound was the crackling of the fire. Amaris remained frozen, the ladle dripping soup onto the stone floor. Varric's gaze was sharp, suspicious. He was connecting the dots. The anomaly at the Blood Moon auction. The king's hand, Theron, sniffing the air. And now, this sudden, bizarre, and absolute command to bring the Omegas. His eyes, cold and calculating, snapped to Amaris. She was the anomaly. She was the one thing that had changed. He rose from his throne, a low, dangerous growl building in his chest. He stalked toward her, his mind clearly racing. This wasn't a summit, this was a summoning. And the king, for some unknown, impossible reason, was summoning her? Varric grabbed the front of her tunic, lifting her to her toes. His face was inches from hers, his voice a venomous whisper. What did you do? He hissed. What is this? You think you can use the king to escape me? She couldn't speak, terror sealing her throat. He threw her to the floor, the soup bowl shattered. Fine, he snarled to the room. The king wants to see his territories? He wants to see the Omegas? He looked down at Amaris, who was curled on the ground, shaking. A cruel, possessive smile spread across his face. Then he will see what I have. He will see my pet. He will see what I have broken. He was going to take her to the king, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the marrow, that she would not survive it. Chapter 7. The Summit. The Lycania Citadel was not a fortress of stone. It was a mountain, tamed. It had been carved from the granite heart of the world millennia ago, a testament to the Lycan King's eternal reign. The air was thin and clean, a stark contrast to the damp rot of Darkwater Ridge. Amaris had traveled for 3 days, bound in the back of a cart with the other Omegas, exposed to the elements. Varric had made sure she was front and center, a ragged, bruised trophy. They were herded into the Great Hall, a cavernous space so large the sky clearing full of Stone River's pack could have fit inside it. Banners depicting the history of the Lycans, histories Amaris had never been taught, hung from the vaulted ceilings. Hundreds of wolves were present, Alphas and their retinues from every corner of the known world, all standing in nervous silence. And on the dais, at the far end of the hall, was the throne. It was carved from a single piece of obsidian, and on it sat the king. King Lucius was a portrait of devastating stillness. He was not a brute like Varric or a politician like her father. He was ancient. He wore simple dark attire, his power not needing the announcement of armor. His dark hair was threaded with silver, and his face was beautiful, but it was a beauty devoid of joy, hardened by millennia of loss. He watched as the alphas presented themselves, his golden eyes sweeping over the crowd, patient and assessing, but there was an undercurrent to his stillness. A coiled tension, a sense of hunting. Alpha Varric of the Darkwater Ridge, the king's herald announced. Varric strode forward, his boot heels echoing on the stone. He bowed, a sharp, arrogant dip of his head. Your Majesty, I have come as commanded. Indeed, the king's voice rumbled. It was the voice from her dream. Amaris's heart stuttered. The sound vibrated through the floor, through her bones, and into the hollow space where her wolf hid. She shrank behind another Omega, desperate to be invisible. You have brought your full retinue, Alpha Varric? Lucius asked. Of course, my king, including my Omegas, as you requested. Varric gestured behind him, a cruel smirk on his face. Though I apologize for their state, my lands are harsh. Only the strong survive. The king's gaze lifted from Varric and moved to the small, huddled group of Omegas. Amaris squeezed her eyes shut. Don't see me, don't see me. Please, don't see me. But his gaze was a physical thing. It was a weight, a heat, a force of nature. It passed over the first Omega, the second. And then it stopped. It was on her. The world went utterly, profoundly silent. The shuffling of hundreds of wolves, the crackling of the torches, the wind whistling through the high arches, it all vanished. There was only the heavy, intense pressure of his stare. Amaris trembled, her eyes still shut, but she could feel it, like the heat of a sun she'd never seen. He knew. He rose from his throne. The sound of the obsidian scraping stone was the only sound in the hall. Every alpha tensed. The king never left his throne during the summit. He took one step, then another. He was descending the dais, moving toward them. Toward her. She could smell him now, not the cold iron of Varric, but something ancient, elemental. Pine and ozone and a deep burning scent like embers. Amaris, a voice whispered in her mind. It was her voice, but it was strong. It was Zaria. Look at him. Slowly, forced by an internal pressure she hadn't known she possessed, Amaris opened her eyes. He had stopped 10 feet away. He was staring at her, his golden eyes wide, not with kingly assessment, but with a raw, 1,000-year-old shock. He saw the bruises. He saw the bound hair. He saw her. The hall held its breath. Lucius's lips parted, and he spoke 2 words, a broken whisper that nonetheless echoed in the silence, meant only for her. Her scent. The moon. His eyes were locked on hers, and in their golden depths, she saw not a king, but the man from her silver forest, and he was weeping, without tears. Chapter 8. The Recognition. The moment stretched, thin and taut. King Lucius stood transfixed, his gaze a physical chain linking him to the smallest, most broken Omega in the hall. The air crackled, thick with an energy that no one understood. No one except Alpha Varric. Varric saw the king's focus. He saw the impossible, world-ending recognition in the king's eyes. This pet, this curse, was something more, and she was his. My king, Varric said, stepping between them, attempting to block Lucius's view of Amaris. The arrogance of the move was stunning. She is my property, a simple, broken thing, not worthy of your gaze. My property. The word was a strike. It shattered the king's stunned silence. Lucius's head tilted, a slow, predatory movement. His gaze lifted from Amaris and settled on Varric. The temperature in the hall dropped 10 degrees. The king's eyes, which had been wide with memory, narrowed into slits of pure, primal gold. Move, he commanded. It was not a request. Varric, for the first time, felt a sliver of true fear, but his pride, his possessiveness, was stronger. Your Majesty, I mean no disrespect, but the law of the Pax is clear. Lucius did not bother with words again. He moved. He was not fast. He was instant. One moment he was by the dais, the next he was in front of Varric, his hand clamped on the Alpha's throat, lifting him an inch off the ground. Gasps filled the hall. You speak of law. Lucius's voice was a low, terrifying growl that was half man, half wolf. You who runs a black market under the blood moon. You who tortures the lowest of your pack. You have no law here. He threw Varric aside. The Alpha crashed into a stone pillar and slid to the ground, gasping. The hall was in chaos. Alphas drew weapons, then immediately dropped them, realizing the futility. The king's royal guard materialized, their swords bared, forming a perimeter. But the king paid them no mind. His world had contracted to one person. He turned back to Amaris. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand, her eyes wide with terror. He was the king. He was the voice in her dream. He had just crushed Varric with a single hand. He saw her fear. The predatory rage in his eyes softened, replaced by an agony so deep it was almost unendurable. He had waited millennia for this, and she was terrified of him. "I will not hurt you," he whispered. The words were for her alone. He took a slow step, then another, until he stood before her. She was so small. The scent of her, moonlight and crushed herbs buried under the stench of Varric's cruelty, was the only truth he had known. "They lied," he breathed, his voice thick. "They told me you were gone, annihilated, that your soul had returned to the moon." Amaris could only stare. This was madness. This was a dream. He lifted his hand, the same hand that had just thrown an Alpha across the room. It was trembling. Gently, as if he were touching the wing of a butterfly, he pushed the matted hair from her face. Then his fingers brushed the pulse point on her wrist. A jolt. It was not a spark. It was a detonation. For Lucius, time collapsed. 2,000 years of memory flooded his senses. He wasn't just remembering her, he was experiencing it. He saw her, Zaria, the first goddess, laughing in the silver forest. He saw her dying in his arms, her light fading, their bond severing as she sacrificed her divinity to seal away a great darkness. He saw her soul splinter, destined to be reborn, weak and cursed, until he could find her. For Amaris, the touch was not a memory, it was an awakening. The hollow place inside her, the vacuum where her wolf should be, ignited. A white-hot, silvery light shot up her arm, spreading through her veins. It felt like recognition. It felt like home. Varric, staggering to his feet, his face purple with rage, saw the king's absorption. He saw his pet glowing. "No," he roared, driven by a madness he couldn't control. "She is mine." He lunged, not at the king, but at Amaris, a silver dagger appearing in his hand. Amaris didn't even see him. She was lost in the king's golden eyes. Lucius turned, his eyes flashing from gold to a molten divine light. He didn't need to move. He just looked at the dagger. It turned to dust in Varric's hand. Varric froze, his hand open, staring at the gray powder. Lucius turned back to Amaris, his face a mask of terrible, beautiful certainty. He looked at Varric, at the assembled Alphas, and at the world that had forgotten. His voice rang through the great hall, a pronouncement of truth that shattered millennia of lies. "She is mine." Chapter 9. The Bond Reignites. The King's Pronouncement, "She is mine," was not a claim of possession like Varric's. It was a statement of cosmic fact. It was the sky claiming the moon. The words slammed into Amaris with the force of a physical blow, but this was not a blow that broke. It was a blow that remade. In the deepest, coldest, most hollow part of her soul, where she had been empty for 19 years, something answered. Zaria. It was not a growl. It was a roar. A tidal wave of light and power and fury that had been sealed for 2 millennia. The curse, the thing that had defined Amaris, was not a curse at all. It was a lock. A divine seal meant to hide her soul from the darkness she had fought. A seal so powerful it had taken her mother's life to forge it in the mortal world. And the king's touch, his recognition, his memory was the key. The silvery white energy that had sparked in her wrist exploded outward. It was not a gentle glow, it was a concussive divine blast. A shockwave of pure, unadulterated moonlight erupted from her, throwing the nearest royal guards from their feet. The bruises on her skin vanished. The dirt and grime were seared away. Her bound hair, the silver white of the true lunar line, snapped its leather ties and whipped around her, alive with energy. She felt her. Zaria, the wolf. The goddess, the self. They merged, 2 halves of a soul slammed back together. The silence in her mind was replaced by a chorus of power, memory, and a love so vast it was terrifying. The influx was too much. The memories of 1,000 lifetimes, the agony of a 2,000-year separation, the sudden, shocking return of her full divinity. Her 19-year-old mortal body couldn't contain it. She cried out, a sound that was half sob, half war cry, and her eyes rolled back. She began to fall. Lucius was there. He had never moved, He was the eye of the storm. As the light burst from her, he hadn't flinched. He had watched, his face alight with a terrible, vindicated joy. She was still in there. He caught her as she collapsed, gathering her into his arms. Her head fell against his chest, her silver hair spilling over his dark tunic. The explosive light softened, retracting into her, leaving her to glow with a soft, steady, silvery pulse, like a star held in his arms. The great hall was in utter chaos. Alphas were shouting, guards were scrambling. Varric was on his knees, shielding his eyes, speechless. Lucius paid them no attention. He held her, his fated mate, his lost goddess, his reborn Omega. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of her, the true scent, unobscured. It was the scent of his long-lost home. He had his soul back. He looked up, his golden eyes blazing with the light of renewed purpose. A king no longer grieving, but avenging. He looked at the chaos she had caused, at the proof of her divinity lying unconscious in his arms. He whispered the words into her hair, a broken promise finally, irrevocably kept. The Lycan King remembered her. Chapter 10, The Moon's Memory. Amaris woke to the smell of lavender and old clean stone. She was not in the kennels. She was not in the great hall. She was lying in a bed so large it could have held 10 of her. The sheets were silk, the blankets were thick, dark fur, and the room was a vast circular chamber at the top of the citadel. The walls were lined with ancient leather-bound books, and one entire wall was a window, a single pane of crystal looking out over the mountains. The moon, a thin sliver of new beginning, hung in the center. She is awake. The voice was female, cracked and dry as old parchment. Amaris turned her head. An ancient she-wolf sat by the fire. She was tiny, her gray fur so thin it was almost translucent, her eyes a milky, blind white. This was Elder Yvain, the pack's seer, a wolf so old she was said to remember the time before the king. "He has not left your side," Yvain rasped, gesturing with a gnarled hand. Amaris looked. King Lucius was in the shadows, standing by the window. He had not moved, it seemed, since he had brought her here. He was just watching her, his posture one of a guardian, a wolf on the vigilant edge. "Where?" Amaris's voice was rough, but it was hers. It was no longer the Omega's whisper. "You are safe," Lucius said. His voice, the voice from her dream, was deep, and it resonated with 1,000 years of pain. He stepped into the firelight. "You are in my chambers. You are in my home." What happened?" Amaris asked, pushing herself up. Her body felt different. It was still hers, but it was thrumming, like a well-tuned instrument. She could feel Zaria, a warm, powerful presence, curled in her mind, awake and watching. "You remembered," Lucius said simply. "It is not so simple, my king," Yvain cackled, her blind eyes fixed on Amaris. "He remembers. You are—" "I don't understand," Amaris said, her heart beginning to pound. "I am Amaris. I was cursed." "You were sealed," Yvain corrected, her voice gaining strength. "Ages ago, child, you were not Amaris. You were Zaria, the first mate, the original goddess of the moon, the light to his dark." She nodded at Lucius. "We were betrayed." Lucius picked up the story, his voice heavy with the memory. "A shadow rose from the void. It sought to consume the world, and it sought you first, to extinguish the light. You fought, but you could not win, not without destroying the world you had built. So she made a choice," Yvain said, her milky eyes seeming to see into the past. "She sacrificed her form. She poured her divine essence into a lock, sealing the great darkness away in the void. But her soul was too bright. It could not be extinguished. It could only be hidden. She made me vow," Lucius said, his throat tight. He stepped closer to the bed. "She made me vow to let her go. Her soul would shatter," she said, "and be reborn as mortals, time and time again. The curse, Amaris, was your divinity. It was your sealed power, so great that it warped the mortal world around you. It took your mother's life not out of malice, but because a mortal body was never meant to house a goddess." Amaris stared at her hands. The calluses were gone. The cuts from Varric were gone. Her skin glowed faintly in the dim light. "You," Yvain said, "are the reincarnation of the first moon goddess. And your king," she nodded to Lucius, who had not stopped staring at Amaris, "has waited 2,000 years for your soul to be strong enough to be found." "The blood moon," Amaris whispered, remembering. "It weakened the seal. Lucius confirmed. It allowed your scent, your soul scent, to escape. I scented you at the auction. I commanded the summit to bring you to me. I had to know. He sat on the edge of the bed, his way to comfort. He looked at her, and his golden eyes were awash with tears he would not let fall. I found you, Amaris. After all this time, I found you. The sincerity in his voice, the ancient, profound love broke through her confusion. She was a goddess. She was cursed. She was an Omega. She was Amaris. She was all of it. He found her, Yvain whispered. But the lock is broken. And that which was sealed, it too remembers. A sudden, frantic shouting erupted from outside the chamber doors. A warrior burst in, his armor rent, his face pale. My king! The citadel is under attack. Alpha Varric. He is not alone. He has allies, shadows, things we have not seen in ages. Lucius was on his feet, his face hardening from grieving mate to warring king. Yvain's words echoed in the sudden, cold dread. She was not reborn to be safe. She was reborn to fight, and he is coming. Chapter 11. The War of Shadows. The citadel was built to withstand a siege for 100 years. It fell under attack in minutes. Varric was a distraction. He was the angry, prideful fool, but he had been a gateway. The allies he had gathered were not wolves. As Lucius and Amaris reached the main battlements, the scene below was one of chaos. The shadows themselves had risen. Dark, amorphous shapes, things with too many limbs and eyes of red malice, were pouring over the outer walls, ignoring the guards, ignoring the defenses. They had no substance, yet their touch was decay. Where they passed, the stone cracked and the grass withered. They were the servants of the great darkness, the one Amaris, Zaria had sealed away. And they were all moving toward the citadel's peak, toward her. He did not just find allies, Lucius snarled, drawing his blade. It was an ancient, shimmering sword that seemed to burn with its own light. He was promised power. He made a deal with the darkness. He wanted my curse, Amaris said, her voice quiet, but it carried over the din. She looked at her hands, no longer trembling. Zaria's power hummed beneath her skin, a familiar, steady warmth. He wanted to control what he feared. Now he has unleashed it, Lucius said. He turned to Theron, his hand, who was organizing the defense. Hold the line. Use the silver flame. It will burn them. He turned to Amaris. You must stay here. You are not. I am the one they want, Amaris said, her gaze firm. She was no longer the cowering Omega. That girl was a shell. The true Amaris, the goddess soul, was looking at him. You cannot hide me, Lucius. The seal is broken. I am a beacon. Hiding me will only doom us all. Before he could argue, a massive shadow beast, a thing of claws and whispering despair, scaled the wall and landed on the battlement. It ignored the guards and lunged straight for Amaris. Lucius moved to intercept, but Amaris was faster. She held up her hand. She did not know what she was doing. She only acted. No, she said. A shield of pure silver moonlight erupted from her palm. It slammed into the shadow beast, and the creature screamed, a sound of tearing cloth and dying stars, before dissolving into smoke. The battlement went silent. The guards stared. Lucius stared. Amaris looked at her hand, breathing hard, the power of Zaria singing in her veins. I remember. So do I. Lucius breathed, a savage smile touching his lips. He had his queen back. They're coming for her, Theron yelled, pointing down. Varric himself was in the main courtyard. He was no longer just a wolf. He was wreathed in the same shadow energy, his eyes glowing red, his body contorted and larger. He had given himself over to the darkness. The king can't have you, curse, he roared, his voice a gravelly distortion. The master promised you to me. He promised me I would be the one to break you. Varric saw her on the battlement. He pointed. She is mine. If I can't have my property, no one will. He began to climb, the shadows lifting him, his movements impossibly fast. He was a man driven by a darkness that had consumed his pride and left only envious, obsessive rage. Lucius raised his sword, but the shadows were everywhere, bogging down his warriors. Amaris looked at the sky. The moon was still a sliver, but the blood moon's apex, the source of her reawakening, was still echoing. The sky itself was stained a faint, bloody red. He wants me, she said to Lucius. Then he will have me. She stepped up onto the edge of the battlement, her silver hair whipping in the wind, a beacon of pure light in a world descending into shadow. Chapter 12. The Goddess Awakens. Varric reached the battlement, his form a mockery of a wolf. He was darkness and claws, his red eyes fixed on Amaris. "You are mine," he hissed, the words a promise of eternal torment. He lunged. Lucius roared, fighting to get to her, but he was surrounded by a swarm of the shadow creatures, their sole purpose to keep him from her. But Amaris didn't move. She just watched him come. She closed her eyes. "Zarya," she called into her own mind. "I am here, my Amaris," the wolf goddess replied. "We are one." The blood moon, which had been a faint stain, suddenly pulsed. The ancient cyclical energy, the apex that had found her in the Barrens and reawakened her in the hall, flared one last time. It was not a moon for wolves, it was a moon for her. As Varric's claws, dripping with shadow, were an inch from her throat, Amaris opened her eyes. They were not blue, they were not gold, they were a brilliant, solid silver, the color of the moonlight in her dream. The moment Varric's hand, wreathed in darkness, touched her, the seal on her power didn't just break, it obliterated. A column of divine silvery white fire erupted from her, shooting into the sky, a beacon that pierced the shadow-clogged clouds. It was not a light of heat, it was a light of absolute, cleansing purity. Varric screamed. The darkness consuming him was burned away, seared from his very soul. He was thrown backward, his body smoking, his red eyes fading back to his normal, terrified human brown. Amaris's transformation was not one of flesh, it was one of being. She did not ignite, she illuminated. The silver fire coalesced around her. Her simple dress from the king's chambers was burned away, replaced by an armor of woven liquid light. Her silver hair rose, floating around her as if she were underwater. The curse, the final shadowy restraint on her soul, dissolved like mist. Zarya's full power, the power of the first moon goddess, was unleashed. She did not float, but the ground seemed to lower itself in reverence. She took a step forward, the stone of the citadel purifying itself where she walked. The shadow creatures that had been swarming Lucius and his men suddenly recoiled. The new light was anathema to them. They began to shriek, their forms dissolving, unable to exist in her presence. Amaris walked to the edge of the battlement and looked down at Varric, who was writhing on the stone, his borrowed power gone, leaving him a broken, pathetic man. She felt no anger, no hatred, only a profound cosmic pity. He was a symptom of the darkness, not the cause. She spoke. Her voice was not her own, but it was. It was a harmony, her mortal voice in Zarya's divine resonance, speaking as one. Kneel. It was not a command he could obey, it was a law of nature. Varric, and every shadow creature left in the courtyard, was forced to the ground, their forms bowed in her presence. Lucius, his sword arm lowered, stared at her, his face a mixture of awe, love, and terror. This was the mate he had lost, not the laughing girl in the forest, but the divine, terrible power that had saved the world. Amaris turned her silver eyes, her goddess eyes, to the shadows. "You are not welcome in this world," she declared. "You will return to the void." She raised her hand, and the silver column of light exploded outward, a cleansing wave that washed over the entire citadel, vaporizing every trace of the darkness. Varric, his face pressed to the stone, was trembling, his mind shattered. He looked up at the impossible, glowing being before him. "What? Are you?" Chapter 13. The Lycan's Choice. The silence that followed the purge was absolute. The citadel was clean, the shadows were gone. The wounded were stirring, the air no longer thick with malice, but sharp with the ozone of Amaris's power. She stood on the battlement, her divine light slowly softening, the woven armor of light receding back into her skin, leaving her in a simple, shimmering underdress of her own power. The silver in her eyes faded, leaving them her normal blue, but they were no longer the eyes of a pariah. They were the eyes of a queen. Lucius finally reached her. He stopped a few feet away, his sword still in his hand, his breathing heavy. He was looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. His gaze dropped to the courtyard. Varric was still there, shivering, his mind broken by the brief, terrifying touch of the goddess's true form. He was just a wolf again, a pathetic, broken wolf. All the rage, all the grief, all the 2,000 years of loss and fury swelled in Lucius. This was the creature. This was the line of thinking, the arrogance that had led to her first death. This was the man who had bruised her, beaten her, called her pet. A crimson haze threatened to consume his reason. Vengeance was a beast, and it was scratching at his throat. He wanted to destroy Varric. He wanted to march on Stone River and burn her father's pack to the ground. He wanted to eradicate everyone who had ever caused her a moment of pain. He raised his sword, the light of his own fury making the blade glow. Lucius! Her voice, it was soft again. It was just Amaris. He froze. He turned to her. She had her hand outstretched, not to stop him, but to reach for him. No, she said, her voice quiet, but it was the same voice that had commanded the darkness to kneel. He hurt you, Lucius growled, his voice a low primal rumble. They all hurt you. They rejected you. They sold you. He broke you. He did, Amaris agreed, stepping toward him. She placed her small healed hand over his, on the hilt of his sword. Her touch was not a jolt of power. It was a wave of calm. It cooled the fire in his blood. He broke the shell I was hiding in, she said, her eyes finding his. But I am not broken. You and I, we are rage and memory. We are the sword and the shield. But if we are only vengeance, then the darkness has already won. She looked down at Varric. He is not the enemy. He is a fool who listened to the shadows. The true enemy is the void he served. Lucius looked from the cowering form of Varric to the strong, divine presence of his mate. She was right. Vengeance was a human, wolfish emotion. It was beneath them. What he felt for her was divine. He had to choose. Was he the grieving, vengeful king? Or was he the mate to the moon goddess? Was he vengeance? Or was he love? He let his sword arm drop. The glow faded. He turned, letting the sword fall to the stone, and pulled her to him. He crushed her against his chest, burying his face in her hair, his shoulders shaking with the force of his relief. He was not just holding a goddess. He was holding his Amaris. He lowered his hand, his snarl fading into an anguish that was 2,000 years old. He hurt you. They all hurt you. Chapter 14, The Soul Bond. The battle was over. The cleanup had begun. Theron and the royal guard were tending to the wounded and securing the citadel, their movements efficient, their glances toward Amaris full of a new, profound reverence. Lucius took Amaris away from the courtyard, away from the stairs. He led her by the hand, through his chambers, and onto the high private balcony where he had first scented her return. The air was cold, but she felt no chill. The faint red stain of the blood moon was gone, and the sky was a deep velvet black, punched full of stars. For a long time, they just stood, side by side, looking at the world they had, for a second time, saved. It's quiet, Amaris whispered. The thrumming power of Zaria had settled, no longer a roar, but a content, steady presence. It is, for now, Lucius said. He had not let go of her hand. He held it as if he were a drowning man, and she was his only anchor. In the dream, she said. In the silver forest. The voice, it was yours. It was, he said. It was not a dream, Amaris. It was a memory. Our souls calling to each other across time. He turned to face her, his golden eyes searching hers. I remembered it all. Every moment. Your laugh. The way you, the first you, Zaria, would argue with the stars. And I remembered your death. His voice broke on the word. I held you. Your light faded. You made me promise. What did I promise? She asked, though she already knew. The memories were hers now too, faint like a song heard in another room, but they were there. You said, he whispered, his thumb tracing her jawline, that your soul would be scattered, but it would always seek mine. You made me promise to live, not just to wait. A promise I failed to keep. I have been a king of dust for 2,000 years. You did not fail, she said, placing her other hand on his chest, over his heart. You endured, you waited. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. I would have waited 20,000 more. He took her other hand, holding both of them, his gaze intense. I spoke the words then, he said. As you were fading, I made my own vow. Do you remember it? Amaris's eyes, her mortal eyes, filled with the tears of a goddess. She remembered. The words rose to her lips, a shared memory, a soul bond reignited. They spoke the ancient vow together, his deep voice and her clear one, a perfect harmony under the stars. Even if you're reborn 1,000 times, I will find you. Even if my soul is scattered to dust, I will return to you. He sealed the vow. not with a kiss, but by pressing his forehead to hers. The bond, severed for 2 millennia, snapped back into place. It was a golden, shimmering thread of light that only they could see, connecting his soul to hers. It was not the shock of the Great Hall. It was a settling. It was the feeling of a world that had been tilted on its axis finally, clicking back into place. They were whole. Amaris looked up, her heart, her soul, so full she felt she might burst. "But the world is broken, Lucius," she whispered, her newfound memories showing her the truth. "They have forgotten the moon." Chapter 15. The Moon's Return. The world had not just forgotten, it had soured. In the absence of its divine balance, the king of Lycans and the goddess of the moon, packs had turned inward. Alphas like Varric and Roderick had risen, ruling through fear, silver, and broken laws. The pack, meant to be a community, had become a hierarchy of pain. The world needed to be reminded. News of the War of Shadows and the Omega Goddess spread faster than wildfire. It was carried by the Alphas who had witnessed it, a tale of terror and divine awe. The first emissaries to arrive were from her old pack, Stone River. Her father, Roderick, did not come. He had sent Corvus the sub-alpha with a chest of silver. Amaris met them not in the throne room, but in the open-air garden of the Citadel. She wore a simple white dress, but the silver light of her power was a visible aura around her. Lucius stood beside her, a silent, powerful guardian. Moon goddess," Corvus said, his voice shaking as he fell to his knees. "Alpha Roderick sends tribute. He begs your forgiveness. We did not know." Amaris looked at the silver, the same metal that had been her price. "You did not know?" she repeated. Her voice was not angry. It was clear, like the ringing of a bell. "You did not know that the Omega you starved was a goddess? But you knew she was a person? You knew she was your pack? You knew she was your blood?" She looked at Corvus. "There is no forgiveness here, only a choice. Go back to Stone River. Tell my father to look at his pack. Tell him to heal what he has broken. My curse is gone. His cruelty remains. He will answer for it, not to me, but to his own people." She waved a hand. "Take the silver with you. It holds no value here." Corvus scrambled away, terrified and humbled. The next judgment was Varric. He was brought before them, his mind now clear, his body broken. He was just a man. "You have a choice," Lucius said, his voice hard. "Execution or banishment?" I choose banishment," Varric whispered, unable to meet Amaris's eyes. "No," Amaris said, stepping forward. Lucius looked at her, surprised. "Banishment is an easy death. Execution is an easy penance," she said, her voice echoing with the wisdom of Zaria. "You will return to Darkwater Ridge. You will seed your alpha ship. You will live out your days as an Omega. You will serve the ones you tormented. You will learn in this life what it is to be small, and you will teach others what you have learned." It was a fate, Lucius realized, that was both justice and mercy. Amaris, the queen, the goddess, was not a force of vengeance. She was a force of balance. She did not punish, she restored. Her ascension was not a coronation, it was a rising. The packs that had been fractured began to heal. The stories of her return reminded them of the old ways, the bond between the moon, the king, and the people. She became their queen, not of power, but of spirit. That night, Lucius stood with her on the balcony, watching the world they were slowly mending. He was no longer the king of dust. He was a mate, whole and alive. She was no longer the pariah. She was the moon, returned. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her back against his chest, finally, at peace. They had called her cursed. They had sold her to a monster. But the Lycan King remembered her.